Now to developing news in Decision 2012.
24-Hour News 8's political reporter Rick Albin joining us on set now with a shakeup on the ballot.
Still shaking up. In fact, I'm just looking at the Secretary of State's website. We've got a whole new ball game over in the 76th State House race. While I was watching the updated filings for the U.S. Senate this afternoon, we'll take a look at those a little later in the show, something else much more unexpected was happening. Roy Schmidt, longtime Democrat, two-term member of the State House of Representatives, announced he will run for re-election as a Republican. If this gets the same kind of reaction in our audience that it did in the newsroom, I should repeat that. Roy Schmidt is now running for the State House as a Republican. What's more, he will immediately become a member of the Republican majority and start to caucus with the GOP. In a statement released this afternoon, Schmidt said in part, "I believe I was sent to Lansing to serve the people of Grand Rapids, not political bosses. Simple truth is, extreme Democrat Party bosses like Mark Brewer are unwilling to listen to ideas or accept my position on issues that matter to me and Grand Rapids." Well, Susan, when Grand Rapids Representative Roy Schmidt switched from being a Democrat to a Republican, it was a surprise. When his former colleagues and party chair began alleging impropriety, it leads to the kind of political intrigue that you just can't make up. When Roy Schmidt entered his new caucus room today, Republicans erupted in cheers. Democrats just erupted.
Betrayed, disappointed, and frankly, disgusted with the way that Roy went about doing this.
Democratic Party Chairman Mark Brewer says he wants to know what Schmidt and others knew about the filing of Matt Mozak as a Democratic candidate and alleges that filing may be in violation of the law.
He's committed perjury in what he filed yesterday. Among other things in this affidavit, he claims that he's been a resident of Kent County for 22 years. That's a lie because, in fact, we know he's been a registered voter in Ottawa County.
24-Hour News 8 obtained that affidavit, and it does indeed say that he has lived in Kent County for 22 years. But we have also confirmed with the Secretary of State that he was a registered voter in Ottawa County as late as yesterday. Brewer wants to know who knew what about that.
It's time for Roy Schmidt and Speaker Jace Bolger and the rest of them to come clean about what they knew about this fake Democrat.
Schmidt and Bolger say they've had no contact with Mozak, but this is an argument we have not heard the last of.
It all started when a longtime Democrat switched to the Republican Party, and now the fallout from the decision made by Rep. Roy Schmidt is growing.
24-Hour News 8 political reporter Rick Albin has been working this story from the beginning and has the latest surprise twist in a story that really just seems to keep evolving. Yeah, there's a lot to this story we don't know, but there's a lot that we do know today that we didn't know yesterday. Today, the man who the chairman of the state Democratic Party called a fake Democrat withdrew his candidacy for the 76th House seat, raising more questions about how all of this came to be in the first place. Matt Mozak submitted this handwritten note to the Kent County Clerk's office at 8:45 this morning. It says in part, "I am withdrawing from the election." His political career spanned about 40 hours. But why did he file, then drop out? That's just one of many unanswered questions in an odd state of events that began when Roy Schmidt, a longtime Democrat, made the surprising announcement that he was switching parties. It led to his staff in Lansing leaving. His longtime campaign treasurer has reportedly also resigned. We also learned today that the same person that filed this petition for Matt Mozak on Tuesday at 3:42 also filed this one for Roy Schmidt 8 minutes later. That's according to the Kent County Clerk's office. When I asked Schmidt about any possible coordination between he and Mozak yesterday, he had this to say.
It does appear a bit curious. Was there any coordination?
Not at all. In fact, maybe I don't understand the politics or something I'm missing, but it'd be nicer if I didn't have anybody on the other side.
The advantage would have been that if Democrats, who clearly did not believe Mozak was one of their own, wanted to mount a write-in campaign, they would have had to convince voters to proactively write in another name, while Mozak's would have been printed on the ballot and much easier for voters to access. That's how it would have been, until this was filed with the clerk this morning. Okay, so that's the latest. There's still a lot of questions. Who was the person who made the filings on Tuesday? Why did Mozak pull out 48 hours or less than 48 hours after he filed? And what will become of the calls for an investigation from the state Democrats? We're trying to answer all of those, particularly who did the filing. Today, we contacted a person we believe may have been involved. Sent him a Facebook, left him a phone message, dropped by their house, didn't get in touch with him, but it's not going to keep us from continuing to ask the questions and looking for the answers in this story that keeps developing on a daily basis.
Breaking now at 6 o'clock, we have the shocking text messages that show Grand Rapids Democrat turned Republican Roy Schmidt helped cook up an elaborate scheme, a plan that would pay a man to run against him, essentially rigging the election.
But despite that evidence, the prosecutor's office says Schmidt did nothing illegal. This is a major development in a story that we have been tracking for months. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Susan Shaw.
And I'm Brian Sterling. Just moments ago, political reporter Rick Albin was the first to speak with Congressman Roy Schmidt, or Representative Roy Schmidt, to get his reaction. We'll hear that in just seconds.
But first, we want to lay out exactly what happened. This started on May 15th, when just hours before the deadline, Schmidt, a longtime Democrat, filed as a Republican. Then, minutes later, an unknown, Matt Mojak, filed to run as a Democrat. Just 2 days later, this already started to fall apart when Mojak dropped out of the race.
State police then launched an investigation, and today the Kent County prosecutors said that investigation shows a scheme between Schmidt and the Speaker of the House, Jace Bolger, was meant to undermine the election. But nonetheless, it was legal, and there will not be any charges filed against Schmidt.
We also got our hands on text messages between Schmidt and Bolger. One exchange shows Bolger asking Schmidt if he had found a replacement Democrat. Schmidt says, quote, "I believe we do. We'll know this afternoon."
A lot of questions out there. That's why we want to go to Rick Albin right now. He spoke with Roy Schmidt just moments ago, the first interview that Schmidt has given since this report came out today. Rick?
Well, Schmidt was obviously very contrite. He took responsibility for the whole affair surrounding Mojak and talked about what the influence and input was from the Speaker of the House. But the real question going forward is, will he continue to run for this office? Should he stay in office? And in fact, I asked him that just moments ago.
Should you stay in the House of Representatives?
Yes.
Why?
I think I made a poor political decision, Rick. That might have been different if the results were different today. But I made a poor political decision. I'm serving my constituents, and I'm going to work my butt off to make it up to them, to go door to door, to explain to them. And you know, I really have had, I believe, a good record of serving people in Grand Rapids. And I hope, you know, that they can understand I made a poor political decision. I'm more than willing to admit it. I couldn't wait to admit it, and I want to move on.
Well, I want to read this to you, where the prosecutor says, although this scheme by Representative Schmidt and Speaker Bolger was clearly designed to undermine the election and to perpetrate a fraud on the electorate, it was nonetheless legal. Just because he finds it legal, don't you think elected officials ought to be held to a higher standard?
Yes, we should be. But you know, I mean, everything that's in there, I appreciate what he says, and you know, maybe there's some other things I could have added. Again, I'm taking full responsibility for this, but again, I thought he was very fair, but at the end of the day, I made a poor political decision, and that's what I did.
Should Speaker Bolger remain in leadership?
You know, I would love to start passing this blame to him. This is my decision. This was, you know, why he might have advised me or played a part. It was Roy Schmidt's decision.
It may have been Roy Schmidt's decision, but it's going to have political fallout that goes far beyond just the 76th district. And in fact, later this evening, I'll be talking with Speaker Bolger. But earlier today, he released a statement saying, in part, "I encouraged a Democrat to be recruited to run, but today, even I am still learning about all of the actions that took place surrounding that recruitment." Went on to say, political gamesmanship by anyone is a mistake, and the focus should be on people instead of politics. So our questions remain, was this all just political gamesmanship? Was it a mistake? And what will happen going forward, not just in the 76th, but of course all House races and House leadership? As I say tonight at 10 and 11, we'll get reaction from Speaker Jace Bolger. At the live desk, I'm Rick Albin. Back to you.
And moments ago, we showed you one of those text messages between Schmidt and Speaker of the House, Jace Bolger. 24-hour News 8's Marley Ginter is here to lay out more of what went down there. Marley?
Well, Sue, the text messages we're about to show you really shed light on who knew what and what the plan was. These are from May 14th. Speaker Bolger writes, "Any luck finding your Dem in your district? That's the last piece we need." Schmidt responds, "I believe we do. We'll know this afternoon." Then Speaker Bolger writes, "Can they get the paperwork to you and you get to me so we can get it in our hands, show the GOP we're all set? Then we'll file tomorrow. Schmidt later writes, "We have our man." Schmidt responds, Matthew Mojak. He will be at the Secretary of State with a new address this afternoon. The speaker then texts, "Have this completed, double-checked, and notarized. Bring tomorrow, and we'll be all set. This will block any games anyone could try to play, and you will be clear." Now, we have all those text messages posted right now on woodtv.com. Brian?
Marley, thank you. I spoke with Prosecutor William Forsythe live on 24-Hour News 8 at 5. He explained his decision not to issue charges in this case.
I'm as offended by it as probably most everybody else is, and I spent an inordinate amount of time myself, my staff, talked to other offices. We could find nothing that makes this illegal.
Well, it's no longer a question of who knew what and when and how deeply they were involved, but what did they do now? A lot of people have said that if these two were involved to the degree that this report now shows, that maybe they should consider getting out of office. I put that question to both men, first to Speaker Bolger.
It's no surprise the chairman of the Democratic Party, Mark Brewer, has already, and a bunch of Democrats in the House tomorrow will call for you to step down from your leadership position. Have you given that any consideration?
I have, and I will not. I don't take direction from any political boss, and I certainly won't that one. I think we all need to return to the focus that we temporarily allowed ourselves to get distracted on.
If mistakes were made in this process, who's most responsible for those mistakes?
I think everybody involved needs to accept responsibility. I certainly do. I accept responsibility for working with Roy and becoming distracted by the politics instead of remaining focused on what the overwhelming majority of our conversations were. And that was why he was frustrated, why he was interested in leaving, and what he wanted to focus on.
As for Representative Schmidt, he told me he too will stay in office and try to get re-election in a newly drawn district. We also talked to him about that just because it's legal question, too.
The prosecutor says, although this scheme by Representative Schmidt and Speaker Bolger was clearly designed to undermine the election and to perpetrate a fraud on the electorate, it was nonetheless legal. Just because he finds it legal, don't you think elected officials ought to be held to a higher standard?
Yes, we should be. But you know, I mean, everything that's in there, I appreciate what he says, and you know, maybe there's some other things I could have added. Again, I'm taking full responsibility for this, but again, I thought he was very fair, but at the end of the day, I made a poor political decision, and that's what I did.
So Schmidt accepts responsibility, Bolger accepts responsibility, but that doesn't necessarily tell us where the fallout from all of this goes, because it's still more than 100 days before the general election.
24-Hour News 8's Leon Hendricks is at the live desk right now to break down that angle. Leon?
Brian, good evening to you. The prosecutor says his hands were tied. As a Republican, he says he was disgusted, embarrassed by what happened. But that really doesn't matter when it comes down to making a decision on something like this. It's all about the law, and because there was nothing illegal about what happened, there was no charges that could be filed.
With the help of Michigan State Police, Kent County Prosecutor Bill Forsythe uncovered a scheme that aimed to deceive, an 11th-hour party switch, and the installation of a candidate paid to lose. It was Roy Schmidt's son Ryan that found the man, a friend of his cousin's, a 22-year-old who knew nothing about politics, but lured by the $450 offer. Matt Mojak's name was filed to be the Democratic candidate shortly after Schmidt made the switch. Text messages detail the pitch. "Do you want to make some money?" the message from Ryan to Mojak said. "It's nothing illegal or anything you have to worry about getting in trouble for. Needs to be done by Tuesday, no later than 3 p.m. That was the day of the filing deadline. Once Mojak was in on the deal, he met with Representative Schmidt and his son here at the Secretary of State office in Centerpoint Mall. He needed to change his address to an address within the 76th district that he was running to represent. Representative Schmidt and Speaker Bolger exchanged several text messages on the matter. At one point, Schmidt wrote, "I am so nervous at this point, just want it to go perfect." The Speaker replied, "Me too. I don't like leaving anything to chance, thus my anxiousness to get this last piece wrapped up. All will then be perfect." But things unraveled quickly when the no-name candidate's information went public and a connection between he and Schmidt was established. Mojak withdrew from the election in spite of an offer from Schmidt to up the payoff to $1,000 to stay in the race. In the end, it was determined that Mojak was the only one who may have done something criminal by stating in filing documents that he'd lived in this house for years, when actually he hadn't. But the prosecutor said he wouldn't be charged, deciding that he'd been duped. We found him leaving his job at a Woodland Mall nutrition store. He had nothing to say as he left the parking lot in his Hummer.
Don't you feel like you want to apologize to the people of Grand Rapids?
I think the election process is pretty fundamental in this country. I mean, that's kind of our backbone, if you will, of a democracy. And what they did here undermined that in every sense.
The whole sordid mess, from clandestine text messages to outright lies, a major topic of conversation in Lansing, as you might expect. And that's where 24-Hour News 8's political reporter Rick Albin spent the day today. Rick?
Virtually the only topic in Lansing today. There was a lot of reaction, but perhaps not exactly what you might expect. And during the next hour and a half, we're going to examine that more closely. But the one thing that has developed out of this election year scandal is the willingness on the part of both parties to consider tougher election law.
We have an open process here in Michigan, and so my hesitation would be, as we've looked in the past, it's difficult to close that process. But I'm willing to look.
Is it time to look at election reform again in light of this?
Well, we had introduced a package of like 16 bills that would have addressed part of this as it is. And in fact, Representative Schmidt discharged those bills, or tried to discharge those bills on the floor that may have addressed some of this stuff. And so we do need more sunshine.
I think we should be working on it today. It's a gaping hole in election law that I think if you would have asked anybody before the prosecutor's report came out, they would have said there's absolutely no way this can't be, that there's absolutely no way this can be legal.
As far as changing the law so that can't happen again, I'd be open to that. I just don't know how that would work yet in our election law. I'd have to look at that.
Before you start thinking that sweeping election reform will be at least one bright spot from this otherwise dismal episode, not so fast. If it's fine for both sides to talk about reform, but to get them to agree on specifics and a limited session schedule and an election year would be almost impossible. There is likely to be little or no action until after the election, at least. And by then, the latest drama du jour may have replaced this current crisis.
24-Hour News 8 political reporter Rick Albin was the only TV reporter to sit down with both Bolger and Schmidt within the hours of that report being released yesterday. And Rick is still analyzing what they had to say to him.
Brian, you know what it's like. You run around, get these interviews, and then you go back and listen to them, and you hear something you might not have heard at the time. Both men, for example, took responsibility for their part in what turns out to be a bit of political skullduggery that was handled amateurishly. Schmidt said he was terribly sorry, admitting to a poor political decision. Bolger lamented not focusing on the real reason for the switch. Both men had well-rehearsed spin lines, but none of that explains away the deception, the attempted defrauding of you, the voters, or the outright lies. Still, there is one central question that lingers. Someone somewhere had to come up with the idea of having a straw candidate run after Schmidt switched parties. And on that point, the two principals didn't have their stories exactly straight.
There's a text message on the 14th that says, any luck finding your Dem in your district? That's the last piece we need. That's Speaker Bolger. Did he advise you to find another candidate to run?
Yes.
That wasn't your idea?
We talked about it. I don't know. I mean, that definitely could be a 50-50. I'm trying to recollect back. But he definitely was looking for me to get somebody to run.
Did you suggest coming up with this Democrat?
I certainly encouraged. I don't remember whose original idea it was, but as he expressed his concern about what the Democrats might do to him in that race, I certainly encouraged that. And again, I wish in retrospect we had not allowed ourselves to be distracted by that.
In the end, the who may not be as important as the lingering impact this may or may not have on the coming election. Democrats will work to keep the issue in the forefront while Republicans will try to move forward and put it behind them. And ultimately, it will be you, the voter, who decides if this is an important issue that impacts your vote in November. And we, of course, will be watching those results very closely. Susan?
Rick, thank you. We've heard from the politicians, prosecutors, even Roy Schmidt himself about this scandal. But what about the people who sent him to office?
Can you walk into a hall on the west side and square this with the people that you grew up with?
I believe I can, to a lot of them.
Now it's your turn. What does this mean to your vote? 24-Hour News 8's Joe LaFergie is on the west side of Grand Rapids to talk to the people that put Schmidt in office. Joe?
Yeah, Sue, I'm at Fulton and Strait now. Where I'm standing here is considered the northwest side of Grand Rapids, just across the street, the southwest side. Now, if you know anything about Grand Rapids West Side, you know voters here hold politicians to a very high standards. But if you fail to meet those high standards, you may lose more than just the vote.
Oh, I think Roy's damaged goods.
And that's the feeling of many we talked to on the west side. Jim Jeswinski's run Ballpark Barbershop for 43 years. He's seen a number of politicians come and go. For many here, including Jeswinski, Schmidt was one of the good ones. From his stint as a First Ward Grand Rapids City Commissioner to his election to the State House, he took care of business. He returned calls, answered letters, and stuck around to talk to constituents even after the cameras left an event. He did the job many elected him to do. But perhaps the most unfortunate part of all of this is the loss of faith. While many from elsewhere might consider Schmidt's switch to the Republicans days after he raised funds as a Democrat and what the prosecutor called his attempt to fraud voters business as usual, Jeswinski didn't accept that general premise until now.
This guy told me, he said, when it comes to politics, it's special interest groups and lobbyists that seem to drive everything. And I'm getting to believe that.
For the first time, we hear from the young man Schmidt recruited to run against him and the most definitive answer as to why Schmidt did it. Included in the reports, the texts from the ones between Schmidt and Speaker of the House Jace Bolger setting up the fake candidacy to the messages between Schmidt's son Ryan and the then 22-year-old found himself at the center of the controversy, Matt Mojak. But the reports do more than put the facts on paper. For the first time, we hear from Mojak.
I mean, do you feel like you've been taken advantage of?
Yeah, I totally feel like I'm used.
Yeah.
In an interview with state police investigators and Kent County prosecutor William Forsythe, Mojak explains it all started with a text from Ryan Schmidt asking him if he wanted to make some money.
In the actual text message, it says it's nothing illegal or anything you have to worry about getting in trouble for.
It would be as easy as just changing his residency on paper. Mojak was already preparing to move into his grandmother's house in the 76th district and apply to run. But then the political excrement hit the fan. Mojak received another text from Ryan Schmidt.
Basically, he said, holy cow, did you see you were just on TV? And I was like, yeah, kind of freaked me out.
He talked about the reporters who showed up at home and at work. Roy Schmidt tried convincing him to calm down. They talked about the cover-up, including political reporter Rick Albin's interview with Roy Schmidt after the controversy broke.
I don't know anything. I've never met him.
I said I didn't know you on that first interview that he did. I said I have no idea who Matt Mojak is, and I'm sitting at that almost laughing. I was like, I just saw him yesterday.
We also learned from the documents that 24 Hour News 8 interview was included in evidence collected by state police. Despite Ryan and Roy Schmidt's attempts to calm him down, even upping the original offer from $450 to $1,000, Mojak dropped out of the race. And in the course of the controversy, Mojak asked the question so many in West Michigan have been asking. Why would an entrenched politician who would likely win the seat as a Republican just as easily if he'd stayed a Democrat go through all of this? The answer came down to money.
He said for basically fundraising reasons, because if I don't have somebody to run against, then I don't have my fundraisers. I won't have the money to, pay people. I don't have the money for fundraising.
And from the "he just got caught" file, Kent County Clerk Mary Hollenrich was interviewed by the detective and the prosecutor. She told them at the time that planting a fake candidate is not illegal and that both parties have done this type of thing in the past. At the live desk, Joe LaFurgey, 24 Hour News 8.
Now to Decision 2012 and a closer look at last night's numbers. Embattled Republican Roy Schmidt won his primary despite his involvement in a scam to deceive voters. The plot of that scam unraveled weeks ago, causing others to wage write-in campaigns against him. But tonight we're learning that many of those who boosted Schmidt to victory last night had decided before details of that scandal went public. 24 Hour News 8's Leon Hendricks has been crunching those numbers for us on the vote. Leon's live in Grand Rapids.
Brian, good evening. Right now, Republicans are gathered here for a bit of a meet and greet after the primary yesterday. Of course, the scandal boosted this election into the limelight for Roy Schmidt. And in the end, it was the voters that were actually absentee voters that made the final decision.
I knew it was going to be a long night.
And it was a down-to-the-wire night, especially for the decision thrust to the spotlight of the election day by scandal. Roy Schmidt, a 20-year veteran to public service, caught in a scheme to rig the election as he switched from Democrats to the Republicans and bribed a family friend to run as a Democrat and lose. The whole thing outed in a report from the prosecutor just weeks before the election, and some suspect that may have saved Roy Schmidt from losing the spot on the ballot to write-in Republican candidate Bing Goey, who joined the race after the details of the scandal emerged. Nearly half of the voters who picked Schmidt were absentee voters who cast their ballot before Election Day, and many of them before they knew the whole story surrounding the switch. As far as voters who actually voted in the booth yesterday, more of them wrote in Bing Goey. Estimates are that some 2,500 voters picked Goey in the booth, compared to 1,900 that picked Schmidt. But in the end, it's the totals that count, and Schmidt will compete in November. And it's not lost on him that the numbers are a clear indicator that he has a lot of work to do if he wants to keep his seat in the House.
And the people that know me, that know my record, are steadfast behind me. They're more encouraged than ever because people in their hearts have if they know you and you know you have a good record, they want to forgive.
We asked Representative Schmidt just a bit ago if he supports the legislation that some of his colleagues are proposing that would make these last-minute switches illegal, make what he did illegal. He says he supports that effort. He says he wishes that would have been the case before the election took place or before his mess started to unfold. He said it might have prevented all this from happening to him. Reporting live in Grand Rapids, Leon Hendricks, 24-Hour News 8.